Thank you very much for a great discussion on dust and human health, as part of our One Health effort here at Texas Tech. So that's pretty good. So I'm going to be looking at the questions that you put into the chat, and I'm going to probably start at the bottom and work up just because of how I read this material. So one of the first questions, Karin, is, are there any precautions people should take living in Lubbock when they're outside in severe dust storms or haboobs?
Yes, actually, I've been getting this question quite a lot ever since COVID started. And the best way, use a mask. Just find a good mask. Sure, N95 would be better, but even a fabric one, just to be sure not to breathe it. But truthfully, the most important thing is stay indoor. If there's a dust event, just don't go outside. Try to stay indoor as much as you can until the dust will pass, and then go outside.
Yep. Yeah, one of our daughters was living in Idaho and was dealing with the fires up there, and the amount of dust and soot from the fires was equally as damaging.
Yes, one of our master students is currently looking at the impact on soot and fly ash, using the cell population and the single cell, and it's way more toxic than our dust.
Yep. So here's the next question. Are you aware of any data on the rate of cases of asthma or upper respiratory illnesses in Lubbock as opposed to the rest of the state?
Yes, that's a very good question. So Lubbock, if you don't know, has one of the highest rate of asthma in the nation. We had several attempts to look at the impact of dust in Lubbock on asthma. Because we have this database, we feel more comfortable doing this kind of work because we can go back and pinpoint for a specific date. So we've been doing it for adults, and recently we actually started to do it for kids as well. Unfortunately, at this stage, we still don't find significant statistics, but I feel like the way that we're analyzing the data might be the cause to that. So yes, we are doing that. Yes, we think it's important. Yes, we think there's a problem, but we still don't have a distinct answer for that question.
Yeah, very good. So here's our next one, and something you did allude to this a little bit at the beginning. Because we're a large agricultural area, how does dust impact our cotton production or other crops?
Great question. We don't know. We definitely need to study these. The studies that were done on corn were done north of Texas. I think it was Nebraska, where corn is way more sensitive to cotton. But I've been curious, and I've asked some cotton grower, what's the impact? Does it impact your work? We don't know. Here's another question, something that I was very curious. We have a lot of dairy in our region. Maybe it impacts some of the dairy production.
Right. Yeah. I know even just in my own home, if certain different plants are sensitive to the amount of abrasion on their stems and leaves, and cotton, I'm having worked with it for decades, depends upon the stage of the cotton plant, and part of it is what the velocity is of that entrainment along the soil surface in terms of where that dust is hitting, because it's like sandblasting a wall. You're going to sandblast that plant,
right?
And you're just going to shred it all up. Yep.
Yeah, and climate models say that these dust events will just continue. So maybe the impact will be way more significant compared to what we see now.
So this is an interesting question. Here's the next one, and that is there enough general knowledge of dust events to talk about canceling events during this kind of severe effort? We do it for severe weather, snowstorms. Should we be doing it for dust events?
My personal answer, yes. Depending on the severity of the dust. I can tell you that from my personal perspective, I try to be sure that my family and especially my daughter will be indoor. Yeah. When we have a dust event, even the slight one. Why risk it? Mm-hmm. Yes, they're not as problematic in terms of severity that we have from tornadoes, which we have in Texas in general. but there could be a lot of problems. People who have respiratory problems will be impacted by these events and will suffer for several days, if not months, after exposure to high dust concentration.
Yeah. And I think too, having lived here now for 36 years, there are cumulative effects of these kinds of events on our health that may not show up for 20, 30, 40 years.
Right. And suddenly you start to have something that you didn't even know you have.
That's right. Yeah. Because a lot of things ecologically are cumulative, and they're not a one-time event. I mean, obviously catastrophic fires are, but small incremental things can have long-term consequences.
Right. Yeah. And then one of the things we're hoping to do is sort of create a severity method, so we can understand which of those dust events are more severe. So maybe we can predict them better and alert people better.
Sure. Yep.
But it's down the road if we'll get funding.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we have fire weather warnings and fire weather watches. We ought to start having dust warnings and dust watches.
We do. And that's the most interesting thing. So I grew up in Israel. In Israel, when there's a dust event, it reported in the news. And they basically say, older people, young children, pregnant women, please stay indoor for these hours. There's a chance for a dust. There's nothing here. We need to start having, we need to alert people, at least those who needs to be alert.
Yeah. I mean, all the Western states have that with respect to smoke. It doesn't matter whether you're Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, people do that. Yep. And something, I think one of the comments in the chat that was brought up has to do with something you mentioned also about people coming back from the Gulf War. And that is, it's my understanding, we never get rid of the smaller particles in our lungs. They stay there for our life.
Yes, they are. And as you mentioned, they can accumulate.
Yeah, because there's no we have mechanisms in our upper respiratory tract that'll clear it, but the further they get down to the lungs, the less likely it is to ever clear them.
So we know that microphage is supposed to do that. But the thing is that there's a lot of studies showing that microphage during dust events are overwhelmed. So they're not efficient. So there's an increased chance of accumulating those particles during these dust events.
Right. And for those on the chat, macrophages are one form of your white blood cells that engulf bacteria and dust particles, fungal spores, and that sort of thing. They help keep our lungs clear. Yep. Very good questions. So one of the things that someone asked, and I'm gonna build on that, is, are we seeing increases due to climate and the shift in drought in the West in terms of synoptic events versus the other ones, the convective?
That's a very good question. So to answer that very clear, we don't know, but we do have a grant now under review in NSF to look at the entire US for the last 20 years. And basically, this is one of the things we want to do. We want to understand if specific regions see more increase in synoptics, because we think in some cases that would be the case, but in other cases, there'll be more increase of convective events. And then understanding what the impact of that as we talk about climate change, because it's going to get drier.
Right.
So which of these events are we expected to see more now?
Right. Yeah. That's very important. Yep.
Hopefully it will be funded, but we'll see.
I hope so. Yeah. So this is for something you were talking about in terms of the fungi too. As I think most of you know, I work on fungi, and I had a master's student about 4 years ago, that was working on fungi getting into the museum at Texas Tech from the air supply and growing on material within the museum. And so we did a year-long study to understand that, but this is where it comes into this context. Depending upon the wind direction, we were getting fungi that are not typically growing in Lubbock. They would come out of the Gulf. They were coming out of Houston and Galveston, and those spores are just blown up here. And you would see that transition from a Lubbock-dominated fungal flora to a Gulf Coast-dominated fungal flora for a couple of days, and then it would shift back. But fungal spores move thousands of miles, depending upon the wind direction. Yeah, and they're made to be dispersed that way.
We have a very important comment in the chat. Yes, our local National Weather Service is doing an amazing job when it comes to forecasts and reports of dust.
Yep.
Unfortunately, not every, well, maybe weather geek like me look at those things, but I'm not sure a lot of the people look at those forecasts to see if there's an advisory for a dust that should happen.
Yeah.
And be more aware. I mean, today with our phone, you can get the app or you can get the icon, which make it easier, but there's still a lot of work to do. We found several dust events that were not even reported or were not predicted by the National Weather Service, and we're hoping to work with them to try to understand that.
No, that's a good, that is a very good point. You know, in looking at some of your some of your pictures where the synoptic fronts were coming through, or the convective, what is it about the Lubbock about the landscape of the Llano Estacado that has that impact around here?
So flat. It's a big, I want to say, advantage that we have for that it's so flat. It's just easier for the wind to blow.
Mm-hmm. And so when something like that does occur, you look at some of those pictures for the plumes, that dust goes almost all the way across the state into Oklahoma and up into Kansas and
Canada. We have the 2019 dust event, the big one from April, went all the way to Canada. So dust, as I mentioned earlier, don't care about boundaries. Some of those dust will stay closer in the next few states, but other can travel.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to mention something about, I noticed on one of your graphs that one of the dominant minerals was silica.
Yeah. Well,
do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Silica is a known mineral in many of the dust particles, but silica, importantly enough, silica as a pure is very toxic. So we're trying to, one of our hypotheses was that when we have samples with high concentration of silica, we would find them probably to be more toxic, and that's not what we found. So that's a very interesting aspect, because silica known to cause silicosis, which is a very tough lung disease. Yep.
Yeah, silicosis. That's exactly right. Yep.
So we'll see. It's great because it's more work for me to do, but
right. Yeah.
But there's still a lot of open questions.
Yeah, very much so. How much, in your estimation, on a typical year, how much dust is deposited per square hectare or something like that? Do you have a calculation?
We've never calculated that, and I'm sure there's people who are way more qualified to calculate the amount of dust that accumulate in a region. But on average, we have 21 dust events per year.
Mm-hmm.
So some of our dust are way more severe and has a high concentration of particles. So there could be a lot on our dusty year, like this year. The last few months have been heaven for me because we had so much dust.
Sure.
So we have probably a very high concentration just this last few months.
Yep. Very good. Well, folks, we have reached our 6 o'clock hour, and it's time for everybody to head for supper. And so we want to thank Dr. Ardon-Dryer for a great presentation and keeping us updated on her research, but also the major ecological and health issues relating to dust and why we do have to pay attention to that, and anything we can do to help mitigate and come up with practical solutions to deal with the dust issues around the Lubbock region for those of us that are going to continue to live here. So anyway, so please join us for the May 10th. But also, if you have further questions for Dr. Ardon-Dryer, go ahead and submit them to the Climate Science Center website, and we will make sure they get sent to her. And this presentation will be recorded and posted over the next month. So thank you all. Enjoy yourselves. And Karin, good to see you as always. And thanks for a great presentation.
Thank you so much. It was great to see you, and great to be back as part of the Climate Center.
No, it is. So good night, everybody, and take care.